"Take off!" Mountain Man ordered the fat woman he bought, but what he did after shocked her. The auction block in Dusty Creek had seen many transactions over its 10-year existence, but none quite as degrading as what was happening on this sweltering July afternoon in 1881. 20-year-old Clara Vance stood on the weathered platform, her substantial 360-pound frame wrapped in a stained and torn dress, while her guardian, Barnaby Thorne, conducted what he was calling a debt settlement auction. "Now, folks," Barnaby announced with the practiced charm of a snake oil salesman, "I know Miss Clara here ain't much to look at. Big as a house, eats like a cavalry unit, and about as graceful as a three-legged mule. But she can cook, she can clean, and she's strong as an ox. Someone must need that kind of abundance around their property. Starting bid is $300, that's what I'm owed in gambling debts, and she's the only collateral I got." The crowd's reaction was immediate and cruel. Laughter rippled through the assembled men, along with mocking comments that made Clara's face burn with shame. $300 for her? I wouldn't pay $3. She'd eat $300 worth of food in a month. I'll give you $50 if you keep her. Clara kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, willing herself not to cry, not to give these people the satisfaction of seeing her break. She'd endured 20 years of mockery and cruelty from her parents, who died ashamed of her size, from Barnaby, who'd taken her in only to exploit her labor, from every person in Dusty Creek who saw her as nothing but a fat joke. This public humiliation was just the culmination of a lifetime of being told she was worthless. Barnaby was getting frustrated. No one was actually bidding. The auction was turning into a roast, and he wasn't going to get his money. "Come on now, someone give me a real offer. She's strong, I swear it. Perfect for heavy labor." $500. The voice came from the back of the crowd, deep as thunder and carrying absolute authority. The laughter died instantly. People turned to see who had spoken, and several actually took steps backward when they identified the speaker. Silas Croft stood at the edge of the square, and even in a town full of rough frontiersmen, he was an imposing presence. At 6'8", he towered over everyone, with the kind of massively muscular build that came from years of work in a forge. His shoulders were enormous, his arms thick as tree trunks, his chest and back rippling with power. He wore his usual blacksmith's attire leather apron over a simple shirt, heavy work pants, and boots, all of it showing the wear of constant physical labor. His face was weathered and stern, with dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and his black hair was pulled back in a practical queue. Silas Croft was known throughout the territory as the finest blacksmith for 300 miles. He could forge anything from horseshoes to firearms, and his work was prized for its quality and durability. He was also known for being intensely private, living alone at his forge in the hills outside town, speaking only when necessary, and having no patience for fools or troublemakers. There were rumors about his past. Some said he'd been a soldier. Others claimed he'd been a prisoner. Still others whispered he'd killed a man with his bare hands. Whatever the truth, people respected him, feared him slightly, and generally left him alone. "Did you say 500?" Barnaby asked, his eyes lighting with greedy hope. "I did." Silas walked toward the platform with deliberate steps, and the crowd parted before him like water. He pulled a leather pouch from his vest and counted out gold coins directly into Barnaby's trembling hands. $500. The debt is paid, and Miss Vance's contract belongs to me now. Draw up the papers." Barnaby scrambled to produce the necessary documents, which Silas signed without bothering to read carefully. Then Silas turned to Clara for the first time, and despite his intimidating size, his dark eyes held no cruelty as he studied her. "Miss Vance," he said quietly, "I'm Silas Croft. I've just paid your guardian's debt, which means you're free from his claim. I'm offering you work at my forge, honest work for honest wages. You can come with me, or you can figure out another plan. Your choice." Clara stared at him in shock. She'd expected whoever bought her to treat her like property, to demand labor or worse. She hadn't expected kindness, hadn't expected choices, hadn't expected this quiet respect. "Why would you help me?" "Because nobody should be sold like livestock," Silas said simply. "And because I could use help at the forge. So, are you coming?" Clara looked at Barnaby, who was already turning away to count his gold. She looked at the crowd, seeing nothing but mockery and contempt in their faces. Then she looked back at Silas, at this imposing stranger who was somehow treating her with more dignity than anyone had in years. "I'll come with you," she said quietly. Silas nodded and helped her down from the platform, his large hands surprisingly gentle. He had a wagon waiting at the edge of town, and he helped Clara onto the seat before loading her few possessions, a pathetic bundle that represented 20 years of life. As they prepared to leave Dusty Creek, someone in the crowd made the mistake of calling out one final crude comment. "Hey, Croft, what are you planning to do with that fat cow? Use her to pull your wagon when your horses get tired?" Silas stopped the wagon and turned to locate the speaker, a drunk miner named Pete Sullivan. In 3 long strides, Silas crossed to Pete and lifted the smaller man off his feet with one hand, holding him at eye level. "I don't want to hear another word about Miss Vance," Silas said, his voice deadly quiet. "Not from you, not from anyone in this town. She is under my protection now, and anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. Are we clear?" Pete nodded frantically, his face going white with terror. Silas dropped him and returned to the wagon, and they left Dusty Creek in absolute silence. The journey to Silas's forge took about 2 hours, climbing steadily into the hills through increasingly beautiful terrain. Silas didn't talk much, but what he did say was considerate, pointing out landmarks, warning about difficult sections of trail, making sure Clara was comfortable. Finally, the forge appeared a substantial stone and timber structure built into a hillside with a massive chimney, various outbuildings, and a surprisingly comfortable-looking house nearby. Everything spoke of years of skilled work and careful maintenance. "Welcome home," Silas said, helping Clara down from the wagon. "The house has 2 bedrooms. The larger one is yours. I sleep in the smaller one. There's a pump inside for water, and the privy is well maintained. You'll find the accommodations better than what you're probably used to." Inside the house, Clara found herself in surprisingly comfortable surroundings. Clean, well-organized, with handmade furniture and actual glass windows. The bedroom Silas had designated as hers was spacious, with a real bed, a dresser, and a washstand. "I need you to understand something," Silas said as Clara looked around in amazement. "I paid that $500 to free you from Barnaby's claim, not to buy you. You're not my property. You're a person who needed help, and I had the means to provide it. If you want to work at the forge, I'll pay you fair wages. If you'd rather rest and figure out what you want to do with your life, that's fine too. This is about giving you choices, Clara, real choices. But why? Clara asked, tears starting to stream down her face. Why would you spend all that money on me? You don't even know me. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if deciding how much to share. I had a wife, he finally said. Her name was Alara. She was built like you, heavy-set, and people treated her terribly because of it, mocked her, told her she was worthless. She took her own life 5 years ago, couldn't bear the constant cruelty anymore. His dark eyes fixed on Clara with fierce intensity. I was working in town when it happened. Didn't even know how bad things had gotten for her. By the time I got home, she'd been dead for hours. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in a similar situation, I would. So when I heard about Barnaby's auction, heard the way people were talking about you, I saw Ilara standing on that platform, and I couldn't let history repeat itself. That's why I helped you, Clara. That's the whole reason. Clara felt overwhelming grief for this man's loss and gratitude for his compassion. I'm sorry about Ilara, and thank you. Thank you for seeing me as worth saving. You are worth saving, Silas said firmly, and I'm going to prove that to you if you'll let me. Over the following days and weeks, Clara discovered a new kind of life. Silas treated her with consistent respect and consideration, never commenting on her size, never making her feel inadequate or ashamed. He taught her about blacksmithing, not the heavy forge work itself, but the business side, the inventory management, the customer relations. He also taught her practical skills like cooking for two, maintaining a household, managing supplies for the winter. But it was one evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, that everything changed in an unexpected way. Clara had been wearing the same worn dress she'd arrived in Barnaby, had never provided her with adequate clothing, and Silas finally acknowledged this. Clara, I need to say something that might be awkward, Silas said as they sat down to dinner. Your dress it's falling apart. You need proper clothes. I have some of Ilara's things stored in a trunk. She was about your size. I'd like you to have them. I couldn't, Clara protested. Those are your wife's clothes. Your memories are in my heart, not in a trunk, Silas interrupted gently. Ilara would have wanted someone to use them, would have wanted to help another woman who understood what she went through. Please, take the clothes, wear them. It would honor her memory more than leaving them in storage. That evening, Silas brought out a large trunk filled with beautiful dresses, all made to fit a woman of substantial size. Clara selected a simple but well-made blue dress and retreated to her room to change. When she emerged, Silas's breath caught visibly. You look... He paused, searching for words. You look exactly right, like those clothes were made for you. Ilara would be happy to see them worn by someone who appreciates them. It was in that moment that Clara realized she was falling in love with Silas. Not out of gratitude, though she was grateful, but because of who he was. His quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, his absolute respect for her as a person rather than judgment of her as a body. He had given her dignity when the world had taken it away. The weeks turned into months, and Clara's role at the forge evolved. She proved to have a natural head for business, transforming Silas's somewhat chaotic record-keeping into an organized system that actually improved his profits. She also proved to be an excellent cook, bringing variety and flavor to meals that Silas had been treating purely as fuel. They fell into an easy partnership, each contributing skills that complemented the others. More than that, they became friends. In the evenings after work, they would sit on the porch and talk about books, about the world, about their hopes and dreams. Silas shared stories about his past as a soldier, about learning blacksmithing from his father, about building this forge from nothing. Clara shared her own painful history, the parents who died ashamed of her, the years with Barnaby who'd exploited her labor while mocking her appearance, the lifetime of being told she was worthless. "You're not worthless," Silas said firmly one evening. "You're one of the most capable people I've ever met. You've transformed my business, made my house a home, and brought light back into a life that had been dark for 5 years. You're valuable, Clara, more valuable than you realize." Their growing closeness was interrupted when Barnaby Thorne appeared at the forge 6 months after Clara's arrival. He wasn't alone. He'd brought 5 hired guns, rough-looking men who clearly weren't afraid of violence. "There's my property," Barnaby announced, pointing at Clara as she emerged from the house. "The one this man stole from me. I'm here to take her back." "You sold her," Silas said coldly, emerging from the forge with his massive blacksmith's hammer still in hand. "I paid you $500. You signed papers releasing your claim. She's not your property anymore." "That transaction was invalid," Barnaby claimed. "I was drunk, coerced, taken advantage of. I want her back, and I want the $500 too. Otherwise, my associates here are going to make trouble for you, Croft." The hired guns spread out, hands near their weapons. They clearly expected Silas to be intimidated by their numbers. They were wrong. But before Silas could respond, Clara stepped forward. The woman who had stood on that auction platform 6 months ago, defeated, ashamed, accepting of her fate, was gone. In her place was someone different, confident, capable, and absolutely done being treated like property. "No," Clara said clearly, her voice carrying across the yard. "I'm not going back with you, Barnaby. Not for any amount of money, not under any circumstances. You sold me because you saw me as worthless, as nothing but a means to pay your gambling debts. But I'm not worthless. I'm not property. And I'm done letting people like you treat me as less than human." She moved to stand beside Silas, and her proximity to his imposing presence made her words even more powerful. "I work here now. I earn fair wages. I'm treated with respect and dignity. I have choices about my life. Why would I ever go back to being your unpaid servant, enduring constant mockery and abuse? I wouldn't, and you can't make me." Barnaby's face reddened with anger. "You think you're something now because this blacksmith took pity on you? You're still just a fat girl nobody wanted. I'm doing you a favor by taking you back." "The only favor you can do me," Clara said coldly, "is to leave and never come back. Silas didn't take pity on me. He saw value that you were too blind and cruel to recognize, and I'm not leaving him or this forge. This is my home now." Silas set down his hammer and pulled Clara close to his side, his massive arm around her shoulders in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "You heard the lady. She's staying. Now you and your hired guns can leave peacefully, or we can settle this another way. Your choice." The hired guns looked at Silas, really looked at him, seeing the incredible size and strength of the man, the confidence in his stance, the absolute lack of fear in his expression, and apparently decided they weren't being paid enough for this fight. One by one, they backed toward their horses. "This isn't over," Barnaby snarled. Yes, it is, Clara said firmly. It's been over since the moment Silas paid you that $500. You got your money. You released your claim. Now you need to accept that I'm beyond your reach and move on with your life. Barnaby and his men rode away, and Clara felt something inside her finally completely heal. She'd stood up for herself. She'd refused to be treated as property. She'd claimed her own worth and her own choices. And she'd done it with Silas standing beside her, not fighting her battles for her, but supporting her while she fought them herself. After they left, Silas looked at Clara with unmistakable pride and something deeper. You were magnificent. The way you stood up to him, claimed your own value, that was one of the bravest things I've ever seen. I learned from you, Clara said. You showed me I had worth, showed me I deserved respect and dignity, showed me that my size doesn't determine my value or my capabilities. You gave me back to myself, Silas. No, Silas said, his dark eyes intense. You found yourself. I just gave you the space and safety to do it. But Clara, I need to tell you something. These past 6 months, watching you grow stronger and more confident, seeing you transform my forge and my life, I've fallen in love with you. Not because you're convenient or because you work hard, but because of who you are. Your strength, your intelligence, your capacity to remain kind despite years of cruelty. I love you, and I'm hoping you might feel the same. I do, Clara said, her voice shaking with emotion. I've been falling in love with you for months. I just didn't think someone like you could love someone like me. Someone like me? Silas asked, pulling her fully into his arms. You mean someone rough and solitary who's better with metal than with people? Someone who lives in isolation because he couldn't bear to face the world after losing his wife? Clara, we're both people who've been wounded by life. The difference is we found each other, and together we're stronger than we ever were apart. He kissed her, then gentle at first, then passionate, and Clara felt years of shame and self-doubt finally dissolve completely. She was loved. She was valued. She was home. They married a month later, with the circuit preacher performing the ceremony and several of Silas's customers serving as witnesses. Word had spread about Clara's brave confrontation with Barnaby, and people who had mocked her at the auction now showed her respect. When Silas slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, a beautiful piece he had forged himself from silver and gold, and spoke his vows with fierce conviction, she felt the final pieces of her old, wounded self fall away. She was no longer the fat girl nobody wanted. She was Clara Croft, wife of the territory's finest blacksmith, skilled business manager, and woman who had claimed her own worth despite everything the world had tried to tell her. Years later, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset over the hills, Clara spoke quietly. Do you remember what people said when you bought me? They thought you were going to do terrible things to me. Treat me like property. I remember, Silas said, and instead I got the greatest blessing of my life. A wife I love, a partner who makes everything better, a home that's finally warm again after 5 years of cold isolation. You saved me as much as I saved you, Clara. We saved each other, Clara corrected, and we built something beautiful from the cruelest circumstances. Barnaby thought he was getting rid of a worthless burden when he sold me. Instead, he gave me the chance to find real love, real strength, real home. That's the best kind of justice, living well, being happy, proving that his cruelty couldn't destroy me. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky and the sound of the forge cooling filled the evening air, Silas and Clara held each other and counted their blessings. What had started with public humiliation and a desperate transaction had become a love story that proved worth was never determined by size or appearance, but always by character, courage, and the wisdom to recognize genuine love when it was offered. The fat woman who had been bought at auction had become a beloved wife and respected member of the community. The intimidating blacksmith had revealed a gentle heart beneath his imposing exterior, and together they had built a life that honored Alara's memory while creating something new and beautiful, a testament to the power of seeing past society's cruel judgments, to recognize the extraordinary value in people others dismissed as worthless.